Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be looking at two Warhammer PC games. Just so happened the person I interviewed, Richard Leinfellner, happened to work on the pair of them, which is quite cool. So the first game we're going to be talking about is Shadow of the Horned Rat, which is a classic, and then the sequel Dark Omen, which is also a classic. So yeah, I have really fond memories of playing these as a kid. Shadow of the Horned Rat, if anyone tells you they've completed this game, they're lying. Notoriously difficult, which is something that Richard talks about in this video. I probably played Dark Omen a bit more. I think it's a bit more accessible, given it was released a few years later. But yeah, it was really interesting to hear Richard talk about his experience working on Shadow of the Horned Rat, how that kind of came to be, and Dark Omen then was actually picked up by EA kind of mid production, which is something he talks about. So yeah, it was really great to chat to him, and I hope you enjoy this video.
Yeah, I'm Richard Leinfellner. I was the head of development, executive in charge of development at Mindscape, and I ran the team that did the Warhammer games, the initial Warhammer games at Mindscape, and then we moved our team over. I moved over to Electronic Arts, and then I took the team with me, and they continued working on Warhammer game there. So yeah, that's my involvement.
Lovely. So with Shadow of the Horned Rat, then, do you remember like how that project, like, how did it start, I suppose? Where did it come from?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was my team's idea. We had a couple of real Warhammer fans on the team. A guy called Steve Lenny, specifically, who was a massive Warhammer fan. He was sort of head of art at Mindscape, and he said, "Wouldn't it be great to do a real-time strategy game based on Warhammer?" And I didn't really know the Warhammer universe, so I thought, well, there's no harm in trying. So I contacted Phil Gallagher at Games Workshop, and Phil was a great bloke. He connected with Andy Jones, and then we just started talking about how we would go about doing this. We had a background in doing our real-time strategy games, and of course that game was turn-based, so we sort of had to. Our initial discussions was, does it really work as a real-time game? So a lot of initial discussions with them were all about how to kind of maintain the purity of their hobby whilst also doing something new, innovative. So that's kind of having done many other licensing deals since then. It's totally atypical. They were really, most licensing arrangements, the people doing the licensing are just interested in how much money they're going to make. Games Workshop were the opposite. They just really want to do a great job. So it was just a real pleasure to deal with them.
I suppose from the get-go, then, did you decide that it was going to be like a Warhammer Fantasy based game as opposed to like Warhammer 40,000? And
yeah, we looked at Warhammer 40,000. There was a game by Electronic Arts made by David Amor called Space Hulk. So they kind of did the futuristic stuff with that. And actually, David used to work with me at Mindscape before, so I knew David. But he was now at Electronic Arts, and we started this all at Mindscape. So we thought we'd go with fantasy because it hadn't really been done. So that's sort of why we decided to go with fantasy. And also, it's to do with what the team played. They were really into Warhammer.
They can play to their strengths, I suppose.
Yeah, and they love the art style, so it was just a real synergy.
Games Workshop, I suppose, gave you the go-ahead to make this kind of game, and
yes, but it wasn't quite as simple as that, because a lot of times when you're doing licensing, you talk to lawyers, and Phil was kind of business dev lawyery, but he was very lawyer light. What they really wanted to make sure is that we really got it. They really want to make sure we really got it. And obviously my team were playing, a large bunch of my team were playing it already, but I hadn't. So before signing the deal, they actually made me go to Nottingham and spend a whole day at Games Workshop and learning how to do every part of a hobby.
Sure,
so I had to sit down and play a game with them. I had to paint miniatures. I literally had to immerse myself in the hobby. And then it all finished off with a few drinks at their internal bar, which was great. So it was just a really good day out, because they want to make sure that we're going to treat it with respect. So before we could touch anything at all, we had to kind of show respect for the property and immerse ourselves with it. They also organized for us to go down to local Warhammer. I'm based in Hove, or Brighton, actually. And we used to go to the local Warhammer shop. They organized for us to have a play session there with the team at the Games Workshop shop in Brighton. So we sat down with them. We met some of the customers. So we kind of did a lot of understanding the hobby. So yeah, it all started with this. And then the next thing in terms of development was really figuring out how to make a real-time work, and that was actually probably the most difficult struggle for them, because they're very much used to turn-based, and of course turn-based play was kind of phasing out in video games. It was all becoming real-time.
Yeah, cool.
So eventually we convinced them that actually real-time is just a version of turn-based. It's just a different way of looking at turn-based, and that really got it across. And we actually did them some little prototypes that could see it in action, and that sort of kind of dispelled their fears about it. They would be very, very different. And one thing they really wanted to do is, obviously, it's mass combat. So you're moving entire units, a lot across the landscape. So they need to behave like units, not as individuals. But obviously, from a game perspective, having them look like individuals is much more appealing.
Sure.
So we wrote all sorts of algorithms to allow them to flock and go into units and go into formations, and then go around obstacles, still getting back into formation. And we prototyped all of this stuff and showed them, and they were going, actually, this is going to work. So it was very collaborative,
Yeah,
I
sure.
think that answers the question. But
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
very dynamic. And then, of course, with the art, they literally just sent us so much reference material, and the artist was so thrilled. We got lots of reference. We got lots of, obviously, we got all of the goodies from the store. We probably got thousands of pounds worth of Games Workshop stuff just sent us because they want to make sure it's right. They really want to make sure it's right. And
so translating from a model on the tabletop into a PC game,
exactly.
You had all the reference material you needed.
Yeah, so these are all 2D cell, and they weren't rendered. They're all 2D cell animations. So there was a lot of thought. And of course, you start off the relationship, and initially they want to check everything, and then later on they kind of got the fact we're on the same page, and they gave us a lot more leeway. Building up the initial trust was quite interesting.
Yeah, sure. But I suppose it paid off then in the long run.
It did, and I have to say that they were just a joy to work with. They took real joy out of it coming together, and beyond the commercial relationship, they just wanted this to succeed. It was just it's very atypical to most sort of licensing deals, which tend to be cynical. Let's just maximize how much money we make, and they were totally. I mean, they cared about the money, don't get me wrong, but they ran a very successful business, but it wasn't their main motivation, which was just a joy, really.
Yeah, so it's refreshing, definitely. Yeah. I suppose when the game is still obviously very iconic, and it's notoriously difficult, I think, for a lot of people. Was that something that you kind of did on purpose, or is it just a product of its time kind of thing?
It's kind of a product of its time. I suppose the other thing is, when you translate something from tabletop, if you think about playing a tabletop game, there's lots of things, there's lots of banter and things that you when you're playing with real people. So it's effectively the game experience. You're probably playing less game. Because it's all slowed down, because you're interacting, you're throwing the dice. When you make it real time, suddenly some of the decisions are very consequential, and there's a knock-on effect, and so things just happen quicker. And I think sometimes getting it right, translating this stuff, probably requires a little bit more testing than we did. And actually trying it with new test subjects. We were still talking about it, sort of essentially it was kind of things were in their infancy then in terms of video games. There was no internet. I mean, this is before the internet. So it was just a case of probably could have focus tested a bit more with some people who are not gamers, and got it to be a little bit more accessible. So that's probably down to us, not. And then, when you start playing it, when you make a game, you get very good at it. So after a while, you just don't
Yeah, you
You're
almost
gonna
have
have to
to like pitch and
what you
talk.
really need is a bunch of people who got like where you see they're playing it for the first time.
Mm.
So it was hard, and to be honest, a lot of games around that area there were quite, especially a lot of non-American games. American games tend to be easier because they're much better at kind of sort of tend to be easier games, but our European games tend to be quite hard. So I don't think it was atypically hard. I've made harder games than that, quite frankly. So games which people still hate me for because they're too hard.
Do you want to move on to Dark Omen?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, we started. I mean, I was at Mindscape, and I moved to Electronic Arts. Basically, they offered me a job, and I moved. And I was basically at Electronic Arts, but I had a non-competition agreement in my contract, so I couldn't hire any of the people I used to work with for a year. And I really liked working with my team. I wanted my team to move on to another project at Electronic Arts, my old team. So I wanted them to do Theme Park World for Electronic Arts, and of course I couldn't hire them. So I essentially had a meeting with the head of Mindscape. I bumped into him actually at one of the trade shows in LA. And I just literally, I'd only been working at Electronic Arts for about, I don't know, 3 months, 2 months.
Yeah, sure.
And I went to him and said, look, I'd like to basically take over Dark Omen and move Dark Omen to Electronic Arts. As part of this, I'd like you to let me out of my non-compete, which means I can hire my old team. And because I knew Mindscape were probably going to kill Dark Omen.
Yeah, so was it originally a Mindscape?
Yeah, it was. It was actually half written while it was still Mindscape.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so effectively they did most of the work, but I had an inkling when I left they would just kill it, because I was kind of leadership on that team and they would kill it. So I met up with him. I said, look, do your deal. We'll take it off your hands. We'll pay you some money, and I'll deal with Games Workshop. So. And he agreed in principle. So I flew down and met up with the executive team, and we kind of did a handshake deal. And then I had to go back to Electronic Arts and told them I've just spent several $1 million on buying a game they didn't want. But that was quite funny. They actually thought it was a good idea, which was hilarious. I thought I was going to get fired, but they thought it was a good idea. And then I phoned up Games Workshop and told them exactly what I did. I was really honest that this is what I'm doing and this is the reason I'm doing this. I don't think the game would come out without doing this. Electronic Arts basically guaranteed they would publish it, and they agreed to it. So we basically transferred all the source code. The whole team pretty much the whole team moved over, and the deal was we'd finish Dark Omen and ship it, and then we would get that team onto Theme Park World. Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, lovely. And of course, Theme Park World is such an iconic game as well. So yeah, I suppose that all worked out well.
It all worked out. It's the same team. It's essentially that team. It's the same team, and they all knew this. By the way, they all knew they're coming to finish Dark Omen. We ship it, and then we go on to Theme Park World.
I suppose because you had previously worked on Shadow of the Horned Rat, that like you said, you had that trust with Games Workshop already.
Yeah, I just didn't. Again, they wanted the game to come out. They've done Space Hulk previously with David Amor, so they actually had good. They had good vibes about it. There's no negative feelings about it. They knew Electronic Arts, and they knew David. And so it was all it's one of the very few times in business when literally everyone was happy. Mindscape were happy because they made some money and they basically didn't have to make the team. Well, actually, they did actually pay the whole team redundancy. So that was also part of the deal I did, is they had to do the whole thing. They had to give them all the money, and then literally they started the next day. So everyone was happy. It was one of the most joyful parts of my life, actually. We're just like, everyone went, that's a great deal. So, but the funniest thing is actually, about a year later, I had a phone call from Chuck Krogel, who was the head of SCI, and he was basically my boss because SCI was bought by Mindscape. He phoned me up and said, "Can I license Dark Omen of you?" So actually, I made my money back by licensing Dark Omen back to Mindscape to put on compilation.
Yeah,
because they did a compilation of RTS games, and they wanted Dark Omen as part. They wanted Dark Omen as part of the compilation. So
yeah, and of course, they've been involved as my timeline is a little fuzzy, but they did Final Liberation as well, SSI.
I mean, SSI. That's the reason I was dealing with Chuck, is because that's exactly what they did. They did RTS really, really well. So again, Chuck is we got on really famously, and it just seemed like a deal. I went back to EA and said, "Look, good news. I've just got you the money back we paid for Dark Omen," and the game got another lease of life because they published a compilation. So.
Yeah. Well, when it came then to actually working on Dark Omen, of course, I think it was the technology had maybe moved on slightly. So, were there big advancements, I suppose, between the two games in that sense?
Kind of. As video cards started coming in, so we started using some GPU rendering, but it was really just the cusp. The real advancements came with Theme Park World when we went full 3D. So that was the big stepping stone where we literally started doing real-time roller coaster riding and stuff like that. With Dark Omen, it was just the cusp. We still didn't. It was literally. I think we'd moved from. I think we just moved up to because they obviously Microsoft bought Rendomorphics, and they did the Rendomorphics did the 2D and 3D package for Windows, and that's what DirectX was made from. So indirectly, it's also the reason I got a job at EA. But basically, because of that, we started moving more and more stuff into DirectX, and that gave us real performance increases because you could kind of go lower level like you could do with. No, because Windows was very much listing on. It was very slow. It wasn't designed for real-time games, and DirectX allowed it to do real-time games. So so DirectX made a big difference. It essentially allowed us to virtually talk directly to the hardware, so we could do much faster rendering.
I suppose to sign off, then, do you got any final thoughts on the games? I've got my copies here. Shadow of the
There you go. Yeah.
Still sealed. Copy
there you go. Wow. Mine, I don't think mine's sealed.
Oh yeah,
my PlayStation version is sealed, but
wicked.
No, do you know what? It was just probably it was a really great time. It was still a very innocent time in making games. People generally got on. It was very, I think it was before games became really big and very commercial. So in many ways, it was kind of the last period of innocence before the big corporations kind of just, when they did their thing. So I always have very fond memories of that time. And to be honest, next week we're going to be staying with Jeff Gaiman, who was the lead programmer on that project.
Oh wow!
we still all know each other, which is just absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's
so I think those friendships. I think what I remember most is the friendships we made at that pivotal time. Having survived literally, decades, which is great.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.